All
There
right,
we go.
so on our 10-year anniversary of the TSN, I thought I'd invite a special guest along to say hi, answer any questions that you wanted. I said there might be a few on Cosmos or in general, and just have a chat. So I'd like to introduce Thom Robertson, who created Artemis and the game that we've been loving and playing for the past 10 years, and is currently in the process of working on Cosmos, which is really coming on. I saw Doug recently looking at planets and scrolling lists and all sorts of stuff going on with that as well.
Thank you for having me.
Hey.
Thank you for such a good game.
We are most honored.
Welcome, Commodore.
Yeah, there were 2 service badges handed out this evening, weren't there? 2 10-year service badges. One for myself and one for Commander Tor, who's here since the beginning as well, who has been getting rather emotional. Sorry, Tor.
Yes, and I'm from Turkey. It's surprised that I'm still alive, so yeah. It's been a rough ride for me.
Well, then I'm very glad you're still alive.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, is anything they want to ask, say, or just generally comment on?
I think the first question that is on a lot of people's minds is, do you have a sort of timeline for the release of Cosmos?
Oh.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm not, I'm not distressed or ashamed about anything. I was kind of hoping that I would release Cosmos 1.0 by the end of 2022, but that just didn't happen. I lost my eldest sister in December, but also I had a lot of other things going on. That's okay. The thing about life is it happens to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You're right.
Is that true?
So at this point, I'm kind of hoping that I can get it done by summertime. As much work as has been done on it over the last few years, it seems like it ought to be usable. It seems like it ought to be done. I have a nice list, but and it seems like as with almost all projects that we do, the list keeps growing whether we like it or not.
Depends on whether Doug throws you more stuff.
Yeah. Well, Doug is a coder local in my local woods. I consider myself a level 7 coder, and he's a level 11 coder. But he's not a game programmer like I am. So I learn a tremendous amount from him about programming, and and he gets kind of a peek into my years of experience in the video game industry. But let me, while we're talking about that specifically, I have a release list here, and I'll just go down real quick. That in the game you guys are regularly playing, there's something called VesselData.xml, which contains all the spaceships and how big they are and what goes into each of them and how many beams they have and so much stuff. So I've updated that to a shipdata.json file for Cosmos. And I have it, and it's pretty much complete in terms of referencing the various 3D objects, but it's still woefully incomplete in terms of making sure all of the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. If that's there's a lot of beams come out of the wrong part of the ship and a lot of incomplete data. So that's data wrangling that has to get done. So that's still something on the table. The game sound effects like beams hitting and ships exploding is not in the game. Shouldn't be that hard, but I'm getting it done. I've begun doing the keyboard system, the hotkeys, but that's not complete. Don't know that black holes are going to make it into 1.0. But I'm trying, and I'm working. In fact, I was working this week with the nebulas, which are working.
No flushing.
That's just ruined half of your tactics, hasn't it, Yui?
There goes the disco ball.
Oddly enough, do we at least have asteroids?
Yes, asteroids are in.
Lance will still be able to hit its nose.
Yeah. In fact, we've got a lot more asteroids than the old game.
Glad to hear that.
Are the
So-
asteroids
Oh.
going to be similarly dangerous to impact?
Yeah, certainly they'll definitely have an impact. You'll be able to crash into them.
One.
Feel free to tell me if you did not want that feature.
Oh,
Because,
we
you
get
know-
Oh, no,
a
we
lot
want
of
it.
entertainment
Okay.
from that feature.
If
There are
you
a lot
crash
of
an asteroid,
inside
does it
jokes
break in
going
two?
on.
Just
Well,
that tells the odds. Yeah.
Currently, there's no smashing asteroids and breaking them into pieces. That's not to say it can't happen. In fact, it probably could happen fairly easily. I've just never tried it with the current setup we have. So, moving on to the list, the anomalies, pickups, treasure, that's in the game, except at least in terms of the data and the structure. I have not yet written a script that actually implements them, but it should be trivial. And I want to do a little bit more with script-based particle transients, which is when you make explosions in space. There are explosions in the game right now, but they're not easily accessible by the scripting language. There's an issue in Artemis 2 that's also currently in Artemis in Cosmos, where if you as a comms officer log out and then log back in, you will have lost all of your old comms messages. And that kind of buffering that and resending them to do that would be a nice feature. So that's on the list. We've got a lot of mission scripts that kind of work 70%. So we've got to pull together a few that work all the way. That's not 100% done. And while the features are definitely in so that if your ship blows up or whatever, you can respawn, the team that I've been working with, which includes Xavier, we've been wrestling with exactly what the conventions are for that, especially in multi-ship missions. If you've got 3 ships in the same space and you're all battling and one of them dies, what happens and how does it happen? That we just need to work that out and get it implemented. And then there's a few things that I want to do to Red Alert that aren't done, and there's a little bit more. There's a lot of little, like 10% left in various features throughout the game, and that's about it. If I can get all those things done, we'll ship 1.0 Cosmos.
What is the fate of manual beams?
So I have yet to implement manual beams at all. And of course I wanted to get, things working, in the default case for everything first. There's no reason, of course, not to implement manual beams. And in some ways, the scripting actually would give a scripter the power to implement manual beams, even if I never did. But I also have a concept, kind of an alternate concept that was still kind of in the blue sky stages, where instead of having a manual beam with kind of big faux binocular overlay like happened in Artemis 2, I would like to try to maybe implement some sort of real-time game that looks a little bit more like the signal jamming user interface in the old B-52s, which is that you're constantly dragging little signal jammers around to solve essentially a kind of a real-time puzzle. And when you get everything just so, then maybe you can bypass the shields with your next shot. But that's still, again, that's something I've been blue skying. Now is certainly the time. If you are a big fan of manual beams, or if you like the idea of manual beams, but you don't really like an aspect of how they were implemented in Artemis 2, now is definitely the time to talk to me about it.
Interestingly enough, I do have a post on the forums from a prior request for feedback. So I'll just direct you to that one.
Yes, please.
Were there going to be different weapons? I remember you showing us different weapon effects and things like that, and talking about how we could expand on the different weapon systems instead of just having primary beams. We have like lightning arc beams and things like that. Is that something that's going to be easy enough to include?
So yes and no. I'm always a big fan of making special effects in my video games. That's just a fun bit of code for me, the coder. And so you would ask yourself, why didn't I have more of that in Artemis 2? And the reason is that once I had the basics, the torpedoes, the beams, the drones for the enemies, the mines, nobody actually rattled my cage and asked me for more. I mean, it was one of those things where I kept listening to, what people were talking about, and no one was saying, I'm tired of the old beam, I want multi-shot or a anime multi-pack missile or a cone-shaped wave, or all of which might be fun to graphically implement. But when we got into it, again, that's just not what users came back and asked me for. They kept asking me for, hey, why doesn't comms work the way I want it? Or, what's wrong with, why can't I have this feature in science? And so on. In fact, definitely in the period of time 2011 to 2015, it seemed to me like I was constantly chasing which of the three extra consoles, science, engineering, or comms, was most annoying to people that month. And then that's what I would focus on. So I guess again, like the manual beam, now is the perfect moment. If you particularly want your anime missile pack or whatever, now is the time to speak up and demand it.
So I have a question, if you will.
Sure.
Before COVID, I had built a physical bridge that ran off the DMX commands. Is that still going to be a part of Cosmos?
Yes, DMX works.
Excellent. And does it more or less correspond to what it was before?
Well, so let's you guys can laugh, but I'm not. This is not a bad thing. Let me step back a bit and explain that we made a decision working in Cosmos to integrate Python as the scripting language for Artemis Cosmos. A lot of that was because I don't think there was anyone who was really happy with the scripting language in Artemis 2.
Sorry.
So, and I'm the one who wrote it, and I'm not happy with it either. And this is one of those things where Doug, the programmer, really stepped in and helped me out. He helped me understand how to integrate Python with my existing C++ code, and what it was good for and how I could most efficaciously use it. But from the beginning, then that made me think that there were a lot of different ways that I could use Python. And one of those ways I thought from the beginning wouldn't it be great if the Python script could control or run the DMX lights? That way, instead of having a giant list of event triggers that mapped to DMX signals, that my code would have to would have to control and kind of negotiate between. Instead, I could just let the scripter, which is to say anybody who wants to, write Python code that actually checks the state of the game and outputs DMX code. So the answer is yes, and with the inclusion of the Python controller for DMX, which is now in the game, you have more power for your DMX than ever before.
It was added, actually, wasn't it, to the thing you had to include it in your files, in your mission script, otherwise everything crashed.
Oh, well, that was for a while. I mean, I fixed it. So there's a script file called script.py for Python, and that goes into every mission folder. So there's also a dmx.py that you can also put in the mission folder to directly control your DMX, but you don't have to have it anymore. There'll be a default one in the common directory, and you can override it.
So everybody can have their own little default DMX controls for their own setup. That'd be nice.
Yes, you can have as much flexibility in that regard as you want to.
But do you have to know Python to do it?
Yes, you do. That's the thing. I'm sorry about that, but at this point, I think the old scripting system was not nearly as usable or understandable as Python. Python being one of the top 5 most popular computer languages in the world. There's a vast array of helpful resources on the internet. Not to mention, of course, nowadays you can always hit Fiverr or Upwork and pay for somebody else to write your Python script if you don't want to.
In terms of Python as well, Draco, on that, I know I've spent the past year kind of teaching myself Python, coming from a background of only doing XML coding on Artemis and no training. I think I did a 4-hour video on YouTube, and that got me into it. But I also know Tetra's been helping me with bits and pieces. I know she knows Python, and I think a couple of others might know Python. So putting the script together, I think we've got expertise within our group to be able to help out with that and put a thing together. It's quite a nice, easy to read and easy to write language. I think I've picked it up quite quickly.
I hear Xavier's going to do tutorials soon.
So I'm sorry, did I miss the question?
No, I was just saying to Draco about Python.
Okay.
Anything else people want to say or ask? Or
Yeah, sure. There are a few people in this division that are really, really interested in what the fate of fighters and shuttles might be for Cosmos.
Well, I mean, I don't have anything against fighters and shuttles, and Cosmos. The watchword of Cosmos has been more and more flexibility and power. The biggest thing in case anybody doesn't know, is that old Artemis 2 was kind of created to be in a box that was 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers. That was the space box that the game took place in. And Cosmos is rewritten from the ground up. So there is no longer any space box. Space is as big as you care to have it. And so, the idea of what are you going to do with different ships and how you control them is much more flexible than ever. Also, 3D movement was an afterthought in Artemis 2. So it was specially programmed for the fighters. In Artemis Cosmos, 3D is just how everything works. And the user interface of the capital ship right now is constrained only because, that makes it a little bit easier to drive it around like the bus it is. Certainly, and in terms of the joystick, you can already grab the joystick and drive the spaceship, any spaceship you want in full 3D. Go in any direction, turn up, turn down, whatever. So it's not that fighters and bombers and things are not going to be implemented. It's, in fact, that they're going to be... The game itself is so flexible that I've been almost imagining them as an afterthought. Not that I intend to make them an afterthought. It's just that, yeah, in the big scheme of things, I can guarantee you fighters and bombers.
Excellent.
Blurry. Blurry, you smiling now?
Ear to ear.
Well,
every mission we run, Blurry seems to be in a fighter, or in a shuttle. It's not actually a fighter; it's a shuttle.
Shuttles are underappreciated.
And more than one person has talked about the fact that, or more than one person in my group that have been looking at the code I've been writing, has talked about the fact that the new flexibility gives us the ability, for the first time, to imagine setting up a fighter wing that's based on a space station.
Mm-hmm.
Or set it up so that your fighter wing can transfer from one carrier to another. Those old limitations would be gone. And
nice.
Yeah. So, things about like fighters, things like shuttles, and things, people have brought up the idea of runabouts, like the kind of small class ship that they operated in Deep Space Nine, are all very, very possible using Cosmos.
So earlier I asked about collisions with asteroids and was delighted to hear that that will still be a thing. Right now in Artemis 2, there is no collision between ships or stations. Are there any plans to change that?
Really? You can drive right through a station?
There's a push
Well, I mean,
radius.
damaging collisions.
Oh, damaging collisions. Yeah.
To get people to slow down instead of speed docking with stations.
Well, the answer is absolutely. The bigger answer is that I don't, and I've never wanted to lose the magic of Artemis. And, you know, Cosmos under the hood is a completely different piece of technology, but I still want it to, especially for first-time players, I want it to feel about the same. But having said that, you know, it's you know, so in the specific case of, oh no, I crashed full speed into a station and it blew me up. You're right. That didn't used to happen in the old game. It can trivially happen in the new game. So this is, I remember I was talking to you about respawning and multi-ship conventions as part of my to-do list. Well, part of that is also a convention of what happens when you ram at full speed into a station, because almost anything could happen and could happen pretty easily. So almost certainly we're going to have scripts that are for beginners where that feature's turned off. And then we'll have other scripts for regular players for which that feature is turned on. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Hardcore mode for the TSN.
So what I'm hearing is that the script writers will have a lot of very fine-grained control over how the game functions. Is that right?
That's exactly right. We intended it that way.
Awesome.
I know, Tetra, you've had a chance to look over my shoulder while I've been writing bits, haven't you?
I know.
Offering lots of help and assistance.
I knew the answer to that question, but I just wanted to highlight that point because it is awesome.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
From a scripting point of view, are you planning to add any way to synchronize the new JSON data, vessel data, or meshes, textures, stuff like that, through the client itself from the server? Because distributing all the stuff is kind of messy, you know?
I agree completely, and the answer is yes. So it's already the case that I've written it so that there's a shipdata.json file which describes the ships, and you can already now write an extra shipdata.json file into the mission folder. So in the mission folder, you can add extra 3D objects. So now the deal is that it's not actually very hard. You know, those kind of 3D objects, and those 3D objects get translated into the object data, which gets sent from the server to the client. But you're right. Right this very second, the art, the 3D meshes and the bitmaps that actually make up the 3D object are not being transmitted from the server to the client. However, that was always on the table. That is definitely one of those things in the list. It's my intent to make it so that if you, as the script writer, have access to the server, then you can create in the mission folder all of the new alien devices you want to show on the screen and put it in the mission folder, get it set up right, and then when people log on, connect with their clients, and they play with you, then kind of behind the scenes, automagically, all that 3D art will go down to the client side and be visible, so that no one will have to manually synchronize their data, like you were saying.
That's just fixed about 100 of our crashes.
Indeed.
The number of crashes we get because somebody's on the wrong version.
And the 1 hour setup time for every new player as well.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm not saying that it's done and functional yet, but it's definitely it's on the short list. It's on the queue. It's going to happen for 1.0.
If I may have another question. This is related to gameplay. I had a chance to play the beta, and I had some thoughts about the 3D environment and 2D map.
Mhm.
I didn't find it very intuitive for various reasons. Were you thinking, considering other types of maps, like 3D maps, like, I don't know, like in Homeworld, like tactical view or something?
I see what you're saying, a 3D tactical view.
Yeah, because if it's 2D, you kind of lack the third, the depth of the radar screen. In
Well,
a way.
that's true.
I think
Have you considered
specifically-
not doing that, or some other, did you consider other ways to represent 3D space on a map?
Well, yes, but yeah. So yes, I see what you're saying, and I've got kind of several answers. First off, I'm not sure if you noticed that there's kind of new indicators. There are little tick marks that show relative vertical distance within the current existing tactical two-dimensional display. That's kind of a kind of a stopgap. It's not the most beautiful solution in the world, but it's something. It helps you understand. Oh, this ship is actually higher than me. However, you're right that there are other ways to describe it. And so, what's gone on from the beginning of serious work on Artemis Cosmos is that I've divvied up the user interface into specific widgets. And the two-dimensional display that I have right now is one of those widgets. So from a kind of a development point of view, pioneering and building a 3D or even faux 3D tactical view would be as simple as, essentially creating another widget and putting it in the game. So at least it's very compartmentalized and easy to add on in that way. So yeah, and I guess again it comes down to rattle cages. If you feel that the current tactical 2D display is insufficient, and and the game really could benefit from a much more 3D or flexible tactical display, please post, please speak up, please contact me by email. That certainly is something that I don't hear enough of right now. You're, I think, the first person to say, hey, this 2D tactical display is not as much as I wanted it to be. So, and
you don't want me to message you. There's too many comments I would have.
All right. But all I'm saying is, again, we're not shipped yet, and so now is the time for me to get the message that something's not right. And I'm very happy to hear if somebody has a strong opinion about something. It actually beats not hearing from somebody and then trying to sell it and suddenly getting 1,000 messages saying, "Oh, we don't like this feature." But specifically in terms of the 2D map and how it works, the 2D map and how it works is definitely another aspect of what I said earlier, which is that I don't want to lose the magic of Artemis for new players. And Artemis 2 definitely had a two-dimensional tactical view, which I thought, especially for new players, was a little bit more understandable, a little bit more easy to grasp, even though it doesn't do a good job of showing what's going on in 3 dimensions specifically. So
I would say working with the script and the widgets, you could, I assume that we could have like an endless number of widgets that you then build into your script as you see fit, and something like that I think would be, because we talked about people being able to customize their own console and what widgets they had on it as well, didn't we?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's definitely layers of customization at this point. Individual players have the ability to sit down at their engineering workstation and rejigger their screen the way they like it for all of the widgets that normally show up on an engineering screen. And then there's at this point, there's the what you see on your screen is defined by your script, which means that if you want to have a combo comms and helm console, then the script can be rewritten to provide that to you. In other words, putting widgets for controlling the ship and widgets for sending messages to different units. All of that can be put on one screen if the script agrees. So, because, and again, what the script is doing is simply saying, I think you should do helms, so please put these 7 widgets on your screen. And adding a different tactical view as a brand new widget, it's compartmentalized enough that then the script itself could say, okay, change it and go to the nice 3D widget instead of the old 2D widget. And boom, it works.
Cool.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
You said there won't be black holes in the first version of the game. Will it be added? And if not, may I ask why?
Well, I'm very happy to talk about that. And I don't think I put my foot down in either way. So almost before I really started significant work on Cosmos, I was disappointed with the nebulas and to a lesser extent the black holes of Artemis 2. I just, they were my own work and I didn't think they were pretty and I didn't think they were very graphically efficient. Didn't stop, some people like Darren Bright making a mission script that made a giant space monster out of 500 black holes, which I would never have done. But anyways, so I reached out to a guy I found on Shader Toy who had made a beautiful custom shader of a nebula. His name was Wes Bakane, and he agreed to custom write me some custom GPU code, some shader code, specifically to write nebulas. And I asked him for the power and the flexibility to do something, really complex enough that I always had in the back of my mind that I could probably kind of rejigger his code, his nebula stuff into a black hole. And I still do feel that way. There's currently no black hole in the game, even though there are nebulas in the game. But if I just wanted to say, okay, here's a black hole object, here it is in the game, and it starts pulling your ship in and it kills you when it gets too close, that would be fairly trivial to write, mostly, again, with the scripting system we have now. But the larger issue of how I would draw it, again, I'd always thought, and I still think, that I'm just going to have to play with the existing nebula code that Wes gave me. Coincidentally, last week I've been working on making the nebula code more accessible, more usable by the script. And in doing so, also, so let me explain a little bit what happened. Came to Wes and I told him I need this, and he explained to me a little bit about what his technology did and how it worked. We agreed on a price, and he started writing it, and he said, look, I'm going to throw in some particles, and I'm going to throw in gas giant planets for free. And that's because they're actually made the same way I'm going to do your nebulas, and they're easier. So I said, of course, I like free things. So I got, he gave me the new particle system, which I'm not using to its fullest extent. So I'm excited about working with that. And then he gave me Gas Giant, which I didn't really plug into the game immediately. And then he gave me the nebulas. I plugged them into the game fairly immediately. So only this week did I plug in the Gas Giant and fiddle its numbers until I got something that looked reasonably good. So the short answer is I got Gas Giant planets that are all ready to go into the game. Gas Giants are absolutely going to be in 1.0. And nebulas, of course, are absolutely going to be in 1.0.
But no black holes.
What I'm saying is I only need to do a little bit more work to do black holes.
Okay.
And because it's only a little bit more work, I'm 90% sure I'm going to put black holes in.
Thank you.
So, Gary, can we change our mission so that we're in the Poseidon Rift just for?
The Poseidon Rift will be empty.
The Poseidon Rift has got black holes that move.
Yeah.
Well, and in the new Artemis Cosmos, that should be easier than ever.
Oh, brilliant.
Oh, the Poseidon Rift's going to get worse.
Oh, yeah. So much more fun.
I have a question
Wait, the
regarding
Poseidon Rift
no.
can drift to other systems?
Okay, I'm sorry. I heard two different questions step on each other. So
Go ahead.
I was thinking black holes in Poseidon Rift will be able to drift to other systems?
Oh, they could do if I code it that way.
Oh.
Kosei, what
black
was your
holes.
question?
Oof.
Regarding network code, are you synchronizing the position of objects, or are you looking to synchronize velocities and stuff like acceleration, angular momentum, and stuff like that as well? Because if we do, then we can write a script that controls object server side, and then it gets synchronized nicely.
I'm trying to get it to synchronize nicely. There's no doubt about that. Right now, the objects are synchronizing server to client on a regular heartbeat. But that synchronization does carry more than just position info. It definitely carries speed and heading and orientation info. So on the client side, yeah, objects are going to essentially travel each frame, try to travel smoothly, even if they're only being updated from the server once per second or so. But yeah, so the answer is the synchronization should be good and it should be smooth on the client side.
Right, thanks.
So a long time ago, like a couple years, I had posted on the forum an idea for a widget which was to give comms another role as chief of security, basically having a map that looks like the engineer's map of the inside of the ship, but instead of controlling damcons, would be controlling marines.
This is the grid objects, I think, Tom.
Yeah, I was wondering if that idea's got any traction.
Well, so I could tell you that it's a nice long answer. So first off, I agree. From a very long time ago, people have wanted boarding actions, security, and other entities inside the ship, and everyone kind of theoretically thought that was a cool idea. I always thought that was a questionable idea because, unfortunately, that part of the game would only be exposed on the engineer's screen, and sometimes maybe on the main screen if the captain asked that to switch to the main screen. So because of that, I was a little dubious as to whether that was a game feature that I really wanted to add, because above all else, I wanted everyone on the bridge to be participating as much as possible. So that sounded to me a bit like a feature that only one player would get to do, if you see what I'm saying. However, how we're doing the internals of a ship in Cosmos, in general, in Artemis 2, I was always a little disappointed by how far I took and what I did with the functionality of the internals of the ship. And I wanted to do better for Cosmos. And perversely, I think that the 3D view of the internal of the ship in Cosmos was kind of a point against it, because it was a messy user interface. It was kind of hard to understand what was going on. It was definitely hard to figure out exactly where you were clicking on the ship internally. So from the beginning of building Cosmos, I kind of championed a more abstracted and two-dimensional view of the internals of the ship. But to kind of to make up for that, I wanted to build a much more flexible, extensible system for the inside of a ship. And we're more than 50% of the way there. I mean, we've got Damcon teams running around. We've got specific hull spots that are meaningful, and we've got hero characters running around inside the inside of the ship, going to engine room to increase the speed of the engines, or going to the weapons station to increase the damage done by the beams. And these are all kind of possible, especially through the scripting system, simply because the way we're implementing the internal space of the ship is much more generalized. And so there's a great deal more flexibility of that. But, especially because we're not at 1.0 yet, we haven't really hammered out and really taken advantage of all that flexibility. So there's an opportunity to, for instance, try to handle cargo through that user interface. We haven't done that yet. And while the ship does take damage from enemies, that damage does not yet propagate inside the ship like it ought to. So that's, So I guess the short answer is absolutely, but the longer answer is that we built something powerful and flexible and new, and we're not quite done with it.
Does comms have another role then? Or is it going to be basically more of the same?
Okay, so, one of the more critical aspects of comms is that, and I don't know if Xavier has shown you or anything, but there's now an actual little picture of the people you talk to.
Yeah, it's true.
And there's a lot more flexibility in the comm station of how you talk to people and which people you talk to and why. So I expect comms, just as a game system that we already know and love, to get a little bit more complex.
I know through scripting I've been able to do a lot more. So like the comms buttons that we have now in our sandbox script are so much easier to write and implement in Python. And because of the way that the widgets work as well, it's a comms widget, so you can have that on, and then you can have other widgets along with it. So like the internal ship, and it's a grid, and it's a grid object, isn't it? To add data to through your script. So you can, like I was fiddling around with having a fuel collection system that changed color when you activated a certain button and things like that. So it's the flexibility that we've got in terms of our own mission script is huge. And I know like in terms of like the base game, mission script is huge as well.
Yeah. So I guess to answer your question, I don't feel like, and I never felt like I wanted to leave comms to be some sort of second class console. And there's, because of the increased flexibility, there's not really any good reason why we couldn't have a comm station that also has access to the ship internals for, say, security purposes.
Yeah, because one of the things that we've discovered here is that nobody seeks comms.
Mm-hmm.
It's SciComms, because it's just enough work that somebody could do it on top of something else. But it's not enough to keep somebody really engaged.
Fascinating. Fascinating. You know, I myself have interacted with several crews where the comms officer had plenty of work to do and felt like their job in Artemis 2 was a full-time job. And as a result, I saw them being as kind of on the ball as a good engineer in terms of supporting the rest of the crew, and also doing more than their fair share of taking out enemies by surrenders. My experience has not been that all comms officers are secretly frustrated.
I think the style of what we play in, and because we have game mastered missions, and that's pretty much it. You lose out on some of the communication with other ships or the incoming messages and things, and I think that it might be a symptom of the way that we play the game.
No, that makes perfect sense. In which case, I would say that Artemis Cosmos has that extra flexibility to give you the full-time SciComm station you really want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to your plural credit, the sandbox does give more activity than the vanilla game.
Mm-hmm.
So that does make it more interesting. It's just not as rich, I guess is the way I would describe it, because otherwise we would have more demand for people to take that station permanently.
Mm.
Well, it makes sense to me. I mean, obviously it's a multifaceted problem because you guys are doing your own scripts and you've built your own space worlds. But I'm here to make the most flexible and approachable game I can make. And,
Of course.
And I'm, and your feedback is very valuable to me.
So earlier you were talking a bit about damage to ships, and one of the, as I'm sure you're familiar, this community very much has dug into those XML files and adjusted things and altered things. And a pain point, I would call it for us, has been the inability to adjust the hull health of something like a fighter or shuttle to try to fine-tune things. So I guess my end question here is, will we have the ability for non-player ships to adjust the health that those vessels have?
Instead of just the shield values, the actual hull points that they have.
Oh, yeah.
Correct.
Well, I think in Artemis Cosmos shipdata.json, we currently do have shield points and hull points exposed so they can be tweaked. But on top of that, at least as far as I understand from what I wrote, the script can override any of those values. So, and to a large extent, the script actually processes the damage through messages. So I would say that at least, especially from the scripter's point of view, there's more flexibility than ever to make sure that all the different space objects in the game behave the way you want them to in terms of damage and total hit points, that kind of thing. And if they don't, then I need to go back and change, because that's certainly part of the increased flexibility that I always wanted to put into the game. I definitely want, all of your so-called pain points I want to erase.
Sorry, I'm just laughing at Tor's comment. Fighters will cease to be as hull resilient as a Torgoth Behemoth.
Those use command,
yeah.
Yes,
All right. Well, Thom, I know that you could stick around for a little bit, couldn't you? But you said you had other engagements.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming up for me at 5, unfortunately, and I've got to get ready for it.
All right. So, if there's no other questions, we can wrap it up there. And if you want to hang around and listen into a crew, that's up to you. If you have chat time.
Well, I just wanted to say that I'm blown away by your group and how long you've been playing. 10 years. As a video game developer, when I spent 11 years in the video game industry, a 4-year product cycle was a long time. Game engines changed all the time, and technology changed all the time, and game consoles changed all the time. I learned how to program the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube back in the day, but those skills are completely obsolete today. So the idea of a game that lasted and a piece of technology that I created that lasted more than 10 years is mind-blowing. Especially for me as a creative person. I have, my muse drags me in 1,000 different directions. So, I'm spending 2 or 3 months on a project is much more understandable and usable. So Artemis has been a truly amazing experience for me. Very unusual for me, both in terms of how much time I put into it, but certainly how much people have enjoyed it and how much people have interacted with me and helped me to stay on the path and keep growing it and keep expanding it and keep making it what you guys want. And frankly, I see no reason to stop. I still think it's one of the most amazing things to ever happen to me. And again, the fact that it's been going on so long means that I'm in very uncharted territory, and I need all the feedback I can get. So once again, I really appreciate you guys. I really appreciate what you've done and the feedback that you give me, and I appreciate all the work that Xavier does to understand and help me understand what I'm doing. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you guys and what you're doing and how much fun you're having with my product. Thank you.
Well, you've created something magical. So thank you.
We appreciate your ongoing commitment to supporting the thing.
Absolutely.
There's nothing worse in a gaming community than having the game fall into obsolescence and stop being functional on modern machines.
I think it's quite amazing the whole community that we've got with people I've met in real life. We've made real friendships, all that just through this game. So I think we'd all agree that we say that we appreciate all the time and effort that you put into it and how much you listen and engage with us as well.
Again, the honor's mine. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers. See ya.
I think we'll have a break as well, sir.
Makes sense.
That was Sim 1. Simulation, that's what it was.
That was Sim 1, everyone. And
That was a great sim.
Now we have a debrief.
Best sim we've ever had.
We need a debrief.
All the GMs just start crying.
Well, I hope that was interesting. I'm glad people enjoyed it.
well, I looked at the eyes of the god. Now I'm blind.
Was it worth it?
Oh,
All
yeah.
right. Well, what do we want to do? Do you want to jump in, have 5 minutes while you Toad dries his eyes and everything, and then jump into the ship?
I think 10 minutes break will be really cool. It's
Recommend
been
20
an hour.
past.
20 past, agreed.
Yeah.
20 past.
All right.
20 past.
We just go straight to ships.
Yeah, if we go on to ships and
Let's
reconvene
wait
at
in the
20
ships.
past, and then we can go straight from there, can't we?
All right.
All right.
It's been really good. Thank you, Xavier.
Thank you.
Thank you.